So Emma Grede is one of the most influential business leaders of the decade in America. Emma Grede is the powerhouse behind household brands and names such as Skims, Good American, and Safely. She is also the self-made richest woman in America and the first Black female to be an investor in both Shark Tank and Dragon's Den. Now, Emma joins us on stage with Kaz Hassan, and she's going to be sharing how to craft a message that cuts through the noise and really activates employees as brand ambassadors. So please join me in welcoming Kaz Hassan and Emma Grede to the stage.
Watch me dance, dance the night away. My heart could be burning, but you won't see it on my face. Watch me dance, dance the night away. I'll still keep the party running, I wouldn't get out of place. Lately, I've been moving close to the edge, still be looking my best. Morning.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited for this fireside chat. We've got a literal fire behind us. Not literal, otherwise. So I want to kick us off, Emma. So we just heard from Unilever's CEO how organizations are struggling to shapeshift to meet the needs of the current economy. What do you think it takes to be a successful business in today's climate?
What a great place to start. How long you got? Well, I think the first thing to say is that, what I find really important is this idea that I've tried to embody in all of my companies, which is to transition on the way up. I think the honest truth is that if you stay still, the business can become super frustrated. And I think that the one thing that I've learned in all of the businesses that I'm part of is that whether you are rooted in purpose and you come to market with a very specific focus, you are going to need to shift and change. And I think that what we've done especially well in those businesses is really understand what's happening in the climate, whether that's a shift in distribution, for example. I came into market with direct-to-consumer specific brands, and we very quickly learned that that wasn't where we could capture most customers. We would need to go into more traditional retail, bricks and mortar, wholesale, and so really understanding this idea of just as hopefully we all do as people, you grow, you learn, you shift, you change. We've had to do that the whole way through. So I like to keep that at the forefront of my businesses. You stay true to your principles, but you truly transition as you grow.
So talking about transition, it's funny, when we were planning this talk, one of the things we kept coming back to was kind of the disruptive nature of your businesses, which is quite cool. And talking about transition, those businesses have grown from spotting opportunities to grow, and usually in quite mature markets as well. Usually it's those people
selling jeans in the US is novel.
Yeah, exactly. And a Brit selling jeans to Americans. And so it's basically from those businesses not being able to move fast enough. How do you go about codifying innovation into your businesses?
Well, I think that's a really good point and a great way to frame it, because it really is about innovation at the end of the day. To speak about being a disruptive business, you really have to figure out what does that mean. And it truly is innovation in product. If you do something like denim and underwear, you have to come to the market with a very specific and ownable proposition. And so for me, that always starts with the actual product. Like, how are you innovating? How are you creating something that doesn't exist in the market? And that comes back down to customers. And so for me, I think about innovation in product and then innovation in the way you deliver that to customers specifically. And so if you take Good American as an example, denim is a pretty stale category, but we took a problem that most women have, finding jeans for curvy bodies. When you look at the US, you're talking about 68% of women are above a UK size 12 and struggle to find clothes that fit them in a regular retailer. So if you go into a mall with 2,000 stores, there are about 4 stores that cater to what would be considered plus size in the US. like a regular size girl. So we just took the traditional denim pattern, we made a lot of changes and brought almost like a Savile Row level of tailoring into that product. And you couldn't see it. If you put it on a hanger, you wouldn't understand. But the minute you put that product on, you would feel it. And so for us, the big challenge was how do you uniquely reach customers and get them to want to try that product? And so what we did, being a disruptive online brand, is say, look, if you're a woman, you need to be able to see a version of yourself. So for us, that was about taking pictures of every single size in the product. Now, it doesn't feel that innovative now, but 7 years ago, you couldn't see anything but a size 4, 6, 8 on any website. We were the first people to put women going from size 0 to a plus size 24 on a website. And so you could come in, you could choose your size. I'm a size 10, boom, there you go. And you could see it. And so just that idea of conversion, and we learned very quickly looking at the data that a woman was 3 times as likely to convert if she could see it in her own size. So to answer your question, it's about product innovation, but it's also about finding a unique way that you can deliver innovation to customers. And it doesn't always have to be brain surgery. Sometimes it's about taking the most simple things and making that almost like a shortcut for customers to really be able to find the innovation.
It's funny because it was definitely a clear spot of the challenge in the industry, because I had a conversation in the Unity HQ 2 weeks ago talking about finding the right jeans. So that challenge exists and you exist to solve it. Talking of innovation, you did something that I thought was super cool, where I heard you speak about how you created size 15. Can you tell me a bit about that story?
I mean, this goes back to being obsessed. When you're obsessed with your customer, you're not just obsessed with the great reviews, you're actually equally, and probably if it's me, more obsessed with the negative things that people are saying about you. So, when I started the business, every Sunday would be my read the reviews day, and I would kind of sit down, get a cup of tea, take a deep breath and be like, what kind of rubbish are people talking about me? And usually what I understood is it wasn't rubbish, it was the truth. It was, this is the voice of the customer. And what I realized is that we were getting more returns between a size 12 and a 14, or rather a size 14 and a 16 than we were getting anywhere else in the size scale. And when you're selling millions of pairs of jeans, it pretty much adds up to a pretty, sizable problem. And so I went to e-com and I was like, why are we getting these returns? What is she saying? But, most people just tick the first option. So it doesn't matter if you said too big, too small, whatever is the first is what they're ticking.
Yep.
That's not the problem. I went to the designers. They had no idea why it was happening. It was not until I spoke to our tech designers and they were like, oh, that's obvious. That's where the size break is. Being a complete novice in fashion, I was like, what is the size break? So without getting too technical, it's actually where you go from what we call a Missy size pattern, so a regular size pattern, to the plus size pattern. And it meant that in between each size, there's 2 inches. But when you get between that size, 14 and 16, there was 6 inches difference. So I was like, well, let's create a size 15. And of course, being somebody that wasn't from, the kind of schmutter business, as we say in America, someone who wasn't a garmento, I really didn't understand what that meant. And everybody said, you can't do a size 15, no one will understand it. Well, to this day, it's actually a good American. It is our 3rd best size, meaning I sell about 3 million pairs in a size 15 every quarter. So it's a really, really meaningful part of the business. But it's interesting because I think if you are, someone who wears our product, you really know being that in-between size, right? Where you're always jumping between sizes. And so for consumers, what we did was took them on that journey. But I think it's a great example of how you can take a piece of data and make it something that's actionable to put in your business. And so for me, I'm always looking for the stories under the data. Like, how can I unlock a problem given what the data is telling me? Because as a super dyslexic person and CEO, I don't always see the patterns. So for me, I'm looking for stories that the numbers are telling me. And I think it's a good way to look at data.
For sure, and that's a really interesting example of not just looking at the data in isolation, it's putting together employee data, customer data. Have you got any other stories like that?
Like things my employees tell me all the time.
Yeah.
Well, what I've learned, and I think is pretty extraordinary, is that your employees can be a superpower. When I look at how much my employees, especially at Skims, how much they actually buy. They make up a really decent segment of sales.
Yeah.
And so when I start seeing employee sales dip, I know something is going to go wrong before I see it going wrong with customers. So I think it's a really interesting internal gauge to look at, to start understanding what do your employees think about your business. Because the way we think about culture, my employees are our greatest cheerleaders. They are the people that live and breathe the brand. They're the reason, for example, we're B Corp certified at Good American, because my employees were like, we went to the factories and it's like a really dirty business, denim. And I was like, okay, well, you know, making loads of money, let's keep moving. And they were like, well, you know what? Like, we feel like it should be better. So I actually look at my employees to steer us in the direction, because they are reflective of the customer base. And when I think about some of the things I'm most proud of, becoming B Corp certified with Good American was a labor of love. It was very difficult. It was almost a 180 in everything from, you know, our vendor base, how we manufacture, our logistics providers. We really had to reimagine the entire business, and we did that because the staff felt so strongly about it. And so when I look at my teams, I look at them as almost like the future thinking. I'm like, they are going to lead me down the right path. And often I think it's the you know, because they know so much about the business, it's the hardest stuff to hear, but it's probably been the most important things that we've done by listening to our own people.
Yeah, that's so great to hear. And like kind of like reinventing the businesses from the front line, the people that buy the product and your employees. When it comes to reinvention, aside from innovation, I guess there's that external pressure of trying to stay relevant, right? We've just had Brat Summer. I'm having a bit of a Brat year.
For a year.
Yeah, maybe a Brat life, actually.
You want to talk about that?
Yeah, actually, flip the script. And of course, you see, like the way I'm asking these questions, they're very demure, very mindful. How do you ensure your trend setting as much as your trend hopping?
Well, here's the thing. I think it's really dangerous for businesses to jump on the bandwagon of every new thing, right?
Yeah.
Because like every day there's a new hashtag, every day there's a new like moment that we all feel like we should be somehow taking advantage of. And this is where I think that culture becomes really important in a business, because to me, culture is how you do things. Now, if it just so happened that in my business, being very demure and very mindful was, you know, very relevant. But it might not work for, you know, it could be good for Good American and not so good for Safely. And so I think that what you have to do, and this is where the advent of authenticity comes in. What is authentic to your brand and what makes sense for your consumer is what's more important than jumping on the latest bandwagon. And so, again, I think your teams are really relevant in this decision making. We sit down and we go, is this us?
Yeah.
Is this how we speak? Is this what consumers expect from us? And if it is, then fantastic. But you have to be extremely nimble with those things. It can't go through a focus group and then like through, you know, a long kind of, you know, marketing think tank, and then like 2 weeks later you're putting it out. It needs to be a decision, it needs to be made quick, and it needs to happen that day.
Yeah.
Because in order for you to be timely, you have to be in that moment. Now, if that's the culture of your business and you're able to make that decision quickly, I would almost say then you should be doing it. If you're the type of business that needs to take 2 weeks to make a decision, you're probably not the type of business that needs to be there and in that moment. And so I think that the culture of the way you make decisions often dictates what you should and shouldn't be doing. And it's a pretty easy decision to make if you think about it like that.
Okay, so when it comes to authenticity, it's funny because it's one of those words. There are so many companies that plaster authenticity on their walls. I think it was one of the words of the year last year, actually. What is, you kind of actually spoke about a little bit of that, but how do you make the jump from saying we're going to be authentic to, and discussing it, to that next level of actually this is who we are and we know exactly how to make that decision in that room?
Well, I pretty much say if it's on your wall, it's not authentic.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
I think that's a really easy like sense check, right? If you have to write a charter to reinforce something in your business, then it probably isn't who you are and you need to do some other work, right? So there's like doing the things we think we should do and reinforcing by means of like, you know, we have this statement, yet the statement gets made, it's put in a file and nobody lives it.
Yep.
So to me, values, authenticity, purpose is something that the company lives by. It's how you make your decisions, how you decide to do this and not do that, who you bring in and who you don't. You know, it's for Good American, for example, I just brought in a new president. And a good example is thinking about somebody that perhaps could have been right for the role versus the person that I hired.
Okay.
Because our values are such that it means we can't do certain things, right? So it's like you have to live by those values. So I'm much less interested in companies that have big statements, you know, like a big DE&I charter. It's like, how do you behave? Who do you hire? When you look around the room, who's there? And more often than not, who's not there? And so I think that these are not things that we can talk about. They're things that we do. They're not things that we say. It's who we are and how we behave. And so
Walking the walk more than talking.
I mean, it really, really is. You know, I remember, you know, and my businesses are all based in the US, even though we're global. And during, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement and after the murder of George Floyd, a lot of people reached out to me. A lot of companies were putting out, you know, big proclamations about the way they will intend to do business and make changes in the future. I didn't do one statement. Not one single one. I didn't write to my customers, because who we are is who we are, and how we behave is how we behave. And you only need to look at my company, not just the marketing campaign, but come into the head office and get to see who's making the decisions, to understand how those businesses are and how they're rooted in the values that they present every day. And so I often sit and think to myself, if I feel like there's some big statement to be made, it's usually coming from a place of inauthenticity and of a lack of something as opposed to truth.
So, okay, so I'm glad that we've got onto culture, because there's something you said around diversity being a superpower. And so as part of that authenticity stream, you talk about diversity and inclusion being so important in business as a superpower, as you said. How do you, if there's someone in the audience thinking, how do I really bake that into the DNA of my business? What would you say?
Well, first of all, I'd say you have to do it. Like, don't talk about it. You know, because that's the problem. You know, it's like we write a statement, we have a long discussion about it, we take a bunch of meetings. This stuff is really simple. At the end of the day, we're all in business to make money, right? Let's not get it twisted. We're not in business to do diversity, equity, inclusion. That's a byproduct of what we're doing. To me, it comes down to run a successful business, you have to be in profit. And when you make a profit, it allows you to do things really well. And so I just think about how you make the best decisions. And to me, the best decisions are made when the right people are around the table. And for me, that just has to be a pure reflection of my customer base. I want to sell to everyone all the time, regardless of where you came from. Do you know what I mean?
I do, yeah.
So my team has to be reflective of my customer. And so when we're making decisions and when we're having debate, and I encourage so much debate within my company, it just makes sense that there's just like a mix. And we're not just talking about race, we're talking about educational background, economic background, you know, like the full gambit, because what I know and where I'm coming from are specific to my upbringing and my point of view. And so I need to furnish myself with a lot of different people around. And so I really don't think about it as how do I, you know, add something in my business. It's how do I best serve my customer? And it just turns out that you best serve your customer when your business looks like your customer. I don't think we need to make it any more complicated than that, because I think that what is happening right now is that we see this massive backlash against DE&I. But do we see a backlash against like healthy businesses and really robust profits? Because that's what I do. And it's just a byproduct of that. So I think that we've just got to like demystify the whole thing. And just like anything new, you know, when I started work, how old am I now? Like 25 years ago. You know, there was no HR. You try to find an HR person in my office, you'd be like just going to like the nicest lady in accounts. Like, you know what I mean? There was no like, you know, head of people. You just find someone nice and be like, my boss is really mean, you know, and she'd be like, take a deep breath, babe, and have a cup of tea. Now, we've moved on. We've progressed from there, and we have, you know, heads of people, and we have really robust training programs, and we know how to deal with dysfunction, hopefully, within our teams. But I do think it's really important that we think about what makes for a healthy organization. And now we know better, we do better. We know it makes sense to invest in our people. We know it makes sense to have HR as a way of driving our businesses forward. And so I would say that we should think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, sustainability, like all of those things. These are just ways that we make for better working environments, make for better customer experiences, and make for ultimately more profitable companies. If that's the way that we're thinking about it, then it just becomes a must-have. It's not a nice-to-have. have.
When I hear you speak about these things, it feels fresh, right?
I'm a simple girl.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that business ultimately is simple. I think that there are things we can really overcomplicate and we need not. I think the world right now tries to make these things difficult because it's maybe more exciting to all be like scared and fearful.
Yeah.
I also believe in ultimate transparency. So for me, you could literally never say something wrong. You can say something offensive and I'll tell you immediately, that's offensive and maybe you should rephrase that. But I'm not like banning you from anything because I ultimately want to get things done.
Yep.
And you don't get things done by shutting people down. You get things done by going, let me just tell you how we talk about this now, like in 2024.
Well, speaking about both, I'm a South East London boy, East London girl. Do you think there's an... Oi. You're right. Do you think how do you think that's contributed to your style as a leader and creating those kind of like new rules of business engagement?
You know, honestly, for me, it's really worked out wonderfully, I have to say, because nobody's scared to tell me anything. You know, it's like I have like an open door policy, which sounds like kind of BS. But, you know, what happens is that people are really honest with you.
Yep.
Nobody waits for feedback for me. I don't wait and say, can we take a meeting for me to give you some feedback? I'm telling you, like, right now, this is how I feel. This was my original take. This is, you know, it's like we have a business that's based on this idea of like radical transparency, immediate feedback loops, because we don't have time, because we're in a very, very fast-paced environment. With that comes a certain leadership style that isn't for everybody, right? I have people that leave my company because it's a little bit much for some people.
Yeah.
But by the same token, if you're ambitious and you want to get ahead and you can handle that, you're going to do really well because you get the feedback quickly, you correct the behavior, you start to think about things really differently, and that makes the business work really well because ultimately we attract the right type of temperament to our company. And so, honestly, I think that style has worked very well for me, and more than that, it's worked incredibly well for the people that have been in my businesses because I'm in a very luxury position where I've made lots and lots of people, not just my shareholders, lots and lots of money. And so when you have this crop of people that started things with you, that have climbed the ranks, that have bought houses, that have made a ton of money, you know, you can see it all working, not just for the top, but also for everybody that kind of came in and gave of themselves. And so, you know, honestly, for me, I feel like it's the only way to work. And if it's not your way of working, then you just don't work with me.
Yeah, I think, and that's fair. I think you've planted that seed in your businesses, and so those businesses, those culture are built around those values, that style of working. And one of the things that I keep hearing when you're speaking is this kind of like customer listening angle that keeps coming through. But I think sometimes the difficulty comes in, especially you've got these disruptive brands that are growing quickly, Skims, Good Americans, Safely. How do you go about scaling that sort of culture, especially that listening? I know you've been very hands-on as well, so.
Yeah, I mean, I heard that somebody said it's called something the other day. What do they call it now? There's like a new business phrase that everybody is talking about, founder mentality.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's just a way of saying like you're allowed to be a micromanager now. It's actually the opposite of the way I was like, founder mentality, it sounds mental, but founder mode is what it is. You know, for me, my point of view has always been hire the best people and get out of their way. I think that, especially now, and I think I learned a lot during COVID, just in terms of like what we were dealing with. You know, some people, you know, you'd see, right, you'd be on a Zoom call and someone would be sitting in their beautiful office, there'd be another person sitting, you know, on their bed, and you could see housemates in the background. There'd be someone else who had like a kid asleep next to them, and then they were turning the Zoom on and off, and you start to get a picture of the different needs that you're trying to cater for within an organisation. I've always had a people first mentality because I really believe that once you've got product market fit and once you've got a little bit of fame, right, the only thing that matters is people and culture. Like that's the difference between, you know, boom and bust. Like for me, the only thing that matters is my people. So naturally, investing in people becomes what you do. Like that's the main part. I have to make the product and I have to invest in the people. And I think that I'm going off kilter from your question. You'll have to
Oh,
remind
don't
me.
worry.
But I do always want to
Scaling.
come back to this idea of like the only thing that matters is the people that come to work every single day. And so I'm really thinking not necessarily about the needs of the company. I'm thinking like, what do they need? Because when they get what they need, they're going to do what I need.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's always really worked for me. Sorry. Your question.
No, it's that totally along the right lines. I guess like the challenge is there's almost this kind of
you
thought
were
that like the
talking
bigger
about
the bigger the business, there are those true
Yeah.
core values. The bigger the business, you kind of there's like that lethargy. You kind
Yeah.
of feel that, and that quickly goes. How
But
are
you
you
know what?
tuned
It's so interesting because what I find is, you know, as again, it just comes down to having the right people in the
Yeah,
company.
yeah, yeah.
And when your values are true and they're cleared, it actually becomes a way of behaving. It isn't the stuff you say.
Yeah.
It's like there's a certain behavior, you know. So talking about this fast feedback, because
Yeah.
we don't mess around with
Yeah.
feedback, that creates a certain environment. You then hire the same type of people, stuff still gets done quickly, and people know, you know, if I say customer 20 times a day, it means that the person that just had a meeting with me probably says
Yeah.
customer 10 times a day, and then it kind of goes on and on and on. And so we know that that is the most important thing.
Yes. So the reality is, don't lose your standards on hiring the right talent to maintain that.
It's the only thing that matters. I am still involved. I would say 25% of my time is about people. It's about bringing in the right people.
Yeah.
Because when you do that, everything figures out. Like to
Yeah.
me, HR people are the most important part of the business alongside the product.
Random thought that I've had based on what you're saying. I guess it's also a tough environment out there to get the right people. How do you create like a unique value proposition to attract that right talent that you know you want in because it's so important to you?
Well, you know, first of all, you pay them really well.
It's a good start, yeah.
Again, it's so funny, isn't it? Because it would be wonderful to kind of sit here and say, listen, we're a progressive, modern company. So, you know, we have unlimited vacation. And in America, you know, you don't get like a lot of maternity leave. And we have exactly the same as a very progressive tech company would have in the UK. You know, there's the kitchens full of snacks, and there's massages and manicures and like all the great benefits. But at the end of the day, what do people want? People want to live well outside of their jobs. And so we pay top dollar.
Yeah.
And it's a strategy that works. You know?
Yeah.
You pay the best, you get the best. And so, you know, again, that comes back down to, you know, I don't run an organization which is particularly 9 to 5.
Yeah.
We have extremely high expectations. And when something has to get done, it has to get done. But if you are working with people and their needs and making sure that you're constantly investing in them, not just through what you pay them, but through training. You're constantly thinking about not just how do I train people for this organization, but how do I train you for life, for just general professional greatness. People know that, and they love it, and they know that they should stay in that company because they're getting something more than just their job. And I always think about everything in life as you know, it's a two-way street. You get what you give. And so I feel like we have, beyond the employment contract, we have a social contract with our people. You know, it's like, I'm going to invest time and energy and resources in you, and I'm going to pay you very well. And in return, I have a really high expectation for excellence, for best in class, and for you coming to the table. And I think when we think about people, we all know in our organization, we have sort of, you know, people that are individually great. Level 1. Level 2, you have people that are fantastic in teamwork, right? Level 3, you've got those people that end up as pretty good managers. Level 4, you've got people that are really quite, you know, like almost like they're like more on a leadership level. Level 5, it's all of those things put together, plus an understanding of the bigger picture of the business. And so when I think about level 5 leaders, they're not just people that are excellent in their vertical, they're people that have an amazing understanding of what their management colleagues are doing and the overarching principle of the business. And so I'm not looking for you to be a level 1 unless I'm paying you level 1. I'm looking for these level 5 leaders that have like this bigger picture to be able to come into the company and really, really drive us forward. And so, you know, I think ultimately when you're in competition with a lot of other organizations,
Yeah.
you need to be thinking about the full gambit and how you take your people from a level 1 or a level 2 to a level 5. And I'm thinking about that, or we as an organization are thinking about that pretty consistently.
So you put a lot of effort to getting the right people in, and then also growing
Or
them.
out.
Or out. I mean, it's the reality of
well,
the
of course,
yeah.
because if you're talking about culture, culture is something that's so easily taken off kilter, and so we take that kind of Netflix mentality. We're like, thank you very much, but no,
Yes.
goodbye, right? So, and I think that that is equally important. And so this idea of radical transparency goes both ways.
Yeah.
You're going to hear things that you don't like
Yes.
as well. And,
Yeah.
and that's part of the thing. And we're very, very quick and very decisive. What I learned is that, you know, a bad egg will ruin things way quicker, or it will show up in the business way quicker than somebody perhaps who's really contributing. And so, you know, we also have to, if you're not talking out of both sides of your mouth, you're making the hard decisions as quickly as you're making the fun ones.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually joked about asking you that question about getting people out, but you brought it up. So, spoken about people, we've spoken about culture. I want to touch on communication. I got a quick insight into your communication style this morning. Like, hi, you're right, as you came in the green room. Can you you spoke about actually that fast feedback, radical candor. Can you paint me like a broader picture of the communication style and preferences in your business? Yeah.
I mean, I have to say, I worked in a lot of organizations where you never really knew what was happening. I think in this day and age, and because I run businesses that are very predominantly direct to consumer, even though they have a large wholesale footprint and a retail footprint, because we're opening a store a week right now. It's about sharing of the information and sharing of the results. And so I think that I run very sales-focused businesses, and so we are sharing every bit of that information all the time. There is no, here's what we did today. It's like, here are the numbers today, here's the margin, here's where we're up, here's where we're down, this is the profit. Like, so it's every metric by which you expect the business to be judged, because you can't expect people to, you know, work towards your goals if you're not transparent about what those goals are. And so, you know, the communication style is to share and to put that information across the organization on a daily basis. Anyone that wants to understand what's happening in our sales at any point in the day has a login, and they can go in and they can understand, and then they can make changes. But the broader organization's results are flashed on a weekly basis. We come together every single month as a total organization. So we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of people in one room, hearing always from the CEO. And so I've made a point of never having a disconnect from the business. And even when I'm away in the summer, because I am European and I like to come home, I'll phone from wherever I am and I'll call in. And so I think it's just about constantly keeping that connection, but equally talking about when the business isn't doing well. And so I think there's, you know, I'm not a cheerleader. I'm not here to make you feel happy, right? So it's like, you're going to share in the upside, you're going to share in the downside too. And I do always go back to COVID, because I think it was such a time of incredible uncertainty that I didn't know what was going to happen, right? And so I had to be really honest about that. And people would say to me, you know, am I going to get fired? And I would be really honest and be like, I don't know. Like, I hope not. And here's what I'm doing. And, you know, and in actual fact, we didn't make any furloughs during the time of COVID. Having said that, there were other sacrifices made. And so I try to just, you know, I think in terms of communication, it's just about this level of openness, but it's also about a level of curiosity. And so my expectation is that you're curious about the results. And if you're not, then I always think about that as an alarm bell too.
Yes, we've actually, last year on this stage, we spoke about the importance of curiosity in communication. I think, so you've got candor, transparency, leading from the front when it comes to communication. How do you, and you mentioned a great story of kind of going to your employees and hearing, what's the problem here? How do we fix that? How do you ensure that you're continuously listening to the thoughts, the comments, opinions, insights from your employees?
Well, we create a whole bunch of ways for them to tell us. I mean, I think that management are obsessed with problems, like problem solving, right? It's like, we've got this problem, we need to solve it. I actually think you miss a lot of problems that way. You know, what we do is like, what's our problems? Because you know what you know, you don't know what you don't know. And so I'm actually always trying to figure out, what are the problems I don't know about? What are the things that are happening in the warehouse in Milwaukee that no one's telling me, you know? And so I think that that is, it's a style that I think has really, really helped me to, again, it's like, it is this open door policy, but you know, again, I don't think it's that complicated. I think that you just have to do what you say you're going to do. And I don't want to sound like I'm repeating myself, but I feel like it's all part of the same thing.
And so with that culture, with that communication style, the best ideas filter to the top, right? So I guess you've got examples of like employees being like, this is happening in the store, I'm hearing this, and I feel passionately about this. Because of that style, those ideas filter to the top to you, right?
Yeah, and you know, those ideas can be, I'm trying to think of a good example. I think the B Corp example is one, but you also start to see with your, you know, the great people in your team will find the things that aren't working and they'll come to you with great solutions.
Yep.
And then, of course, as leadership, you're trying to figure out what are the priority. And my point of view is that, you know, as the CEO, my day is just a series of problems. No, very rarely does anybody come to me and say, oh my God, Emma, we're absolutely killing it. And you know, it's only ever problems. And so my job is to decipher what are the problems that make sense. And so I think it's about what we've tried to do in the organization is have a filter on what our problems are. We're dealing with very young businesses. These are companies that are 5 and 7 years old. And so there are just so many issues. The question is, what issues are you solving for and what makes a difference to our customer? And so we're always trying to put that lens on it, because I could sit there with internal issues all day long and I say, let's talk about the issues that we can solve for our customers first and foremost.
Nice.
And it is also a mixture of like data and instinct, right? Because I also think that I work with a bunch of you know, people that sit there and crunch data all day long, and I'm going to go for my gut over anything the data's telling me all day long.
Oh, cool. Okay. It's funny, I actually had a question about gut instinct versus data later. So we've got about 20 minutes left. Gut. It's funny because I actually don't...
Also, because I'm dyslexic and I can't read the data. So
Is it 45? Is it 54? Who knows?
Unless it's like some analyst who's like, here's a 2-page thing on the data, and I'm like, basically written it out for you as a story, Emma. Read it at bed. Usually I'm like, well, I'll just take the gut instinct.
I'm a story person as well. So I want to, so for the audience, by the way, if you've got questions, any ideas that have come up, you will be able to go into the app on the agenda, start asking your questions, because we've got about 20 minutes left. I've got a couple more questions for Emma, and then I will hand over to you. So one of my questions, which is actually a very selfish question from me. So one of the things I thought you did that was really cool was use your employees in your marketing campaigns. It's quite a meta approach, actually. What impact did that have on the culture at the business?
You know, it was amazing. It was actually for Skims, and it was just one of those things where when you come back down and you think about who's your inspiration, who's making the changes to your business, who is making this business, like who's the living, breathing part of the business. You know, I always go back to my staff and my teams, and I feel like so much is inspired by them. So for me, it just made sense. I also think that, you know, our point of view on, you know, the way we think about campaigns at Skims is really interesting, because we look at our business as a platform. You know, years ago, you would think, you know, the person on the cover of Vogue or the person with all the billboards around town, that was the person that like had a thing going on, had a movie to promote, had a book to put out. We actually look at Skims as a platform. So when we think about who's the next campaign person, we know that we are making that a moment in culture. And so we were like, why don't we take our staff and put them through that same lens? Because they are as important as, you know, the girls from White Lotus or SZA or Jude Bellingham or, you know, Nick Boza or whoever it is that, you know, is in our campaign at that moment. And so it was actually something that was very thoughtful, because it's about constantly putting your team on a pedestal. And it was totally randomized. I think 98% of the people in our company wanted to participate, and we randomly chose them. And it was one of the things that, for me, it was like such a proud moment, because these are people that are on the journey, and I can't do anything, right? But like nothing that we do works without those people. And so I'm constantly thinking about ways that you can truly highlight that beyond what is expected.
Yeah, it was so great to see that. I really wanted to ask about that. And you referenced the kind of that Skims culture there. And it's honestly masterful how, from Jude Bellingham to Charlie XCX, how you've ridden them at the right time.
That's just being really late and in everything. That's just like not having your stuff together. We're like, yeah, we work like really close out. It's like, no, it's still a startup.
Got,
5 years in, it doesn't matter. People get really like excited. It's like, you have a $4 billion valuation. It's like, yeah, I also have 4 billion things that we need to do. And so I think that, the way that we treat that company and the way that we think about what we're doing is to be as close to culture as possible. And the way that you do that is to create the culture. And so we really think about that business as a platform to create what's happening in culture. And I think that we've done a really good job of doing that.
I agree. And I think you've got, each of those businesses have their kind of unique culture, but of course you're a common thread between some of those businesses. How do you ensure that they maintain that unique culture and their style across those different businesses and brands?
I think people imagine there's probably more synergy than there is. The only common thing in those businesses is me. Apart from that, the teams are all different, the shareholders different, the boards are different, the way that we run the businesses is indeed very different. The product's entirely different. And so they take on a life of their own. And I think I learned very early in my career, when I started my first agency, I remember going on maternity leave and the business flopped. It's just an absolute disaster. And I was like, okay, you haven't created a company, you've created a giant team that is entirely reliant on you. And so going into the second chapter of my career, I've been very purposeful about not building a business that lives and dies on my input. These are real companies with real points of view, with a real meaningful way of doing things. And so I think that when you do that, it very rarely orientates around one person.
Do you think that we've spoken about authenticity and obsession with knowing that culture and articulating it, making decisions through that? Do you think it's important for businesses to have a strong point of view in today's environment?
I don't think you have a choice. I don't think consumers purchase in the way that they used to, right? When I was a kid, you just buy like whatever was cool now. Right now, a company has to be reflective of your values. It has to, really chime with the way your expectation around doing business. I was just saying to my team now, I took my 2 nieces to Selfridges last night. When you go to Selfridges with your big Auntie Emma and you can have anything, I was mortified by these kids saying, yeah, we're not really into designer. I was like, what? What is wrong with you? But that's not what they care about. What they care about is culture. What they care about is companies that are doing things in a way that they think is cool. And to them, cool is not like some, thing that I think. Cool is like being responsible. Cool is like recycling everything. I'm like, you care about that? They're like, yes, Auntie.
Yeah.
So at 14 and 18, what is deemed acceptable for a brand is very, very different from what it was when I was younger. And obviously, I live in America where everything is a political statement. And so you have to be very clear about your values. I don't think there are any favors for being impartial, right? It's like, here we are, this is what we care about, these are our values, take it or leave it. And that, I think, is an imperative for any business, because trying to stay, in some kind of middle ground will almost, it's like ensuring that you will die, because customers see through it immediately, and that's not what they're looking for.
And actually that conversation is going on in a lot of the businesses that are in the audience. It's like, how do we better cater for new generations? What are their priorities? How do we communicate with them? What are they expecting from us?
Well, we ask them.
Yeah.
Because it changes all the time. And again, I think that we're in a media culture right now where we cannot rest on what some study or data told us 6 months ago, because the culture is constantly shifting. And I found the best way to figure it out is just to ask. And so we have this constant feedback loop with our customers, but also with people that we wish were our customers.
Yep.
So we are going out and asking people specifically, like, what do you want? What would you like to see? If
Yep.
you're not buying this, what are you buying and why are you buying that? And so really trying to not second guess it, not wait for the data to land on your lap, but indeed just be extremely forthright. And you'll find that when you ask, you get told. Then it's like, what do you do with the information? How do you absorb that in your business? And how do you make decisions based on that information? But I do think that, again, it comes down to like the most simple things. Ask, and you'll probably get an answer.
You mentioned founder mentality earlier, and I know you're appeared on Shark Tank as an investor, and it's...
Don't forget Dragon's Den.
Of
I know
course
Shark
not.
Tank's
Yeah,
really big,
we
but
had Steve last year, so yeah.
Dragons is
The
the
OG.
thing that I love doing the most in the
Yeah,
world because my nan can watch it. So Shark Tank, she's like, what, babes? I'm like, no, go on YouTube. She's like, just go on the BBC. I'm like, fine.
So when you're looking to invest, actually, do you know, as a viewer, when I'm looking at that, especially when you've got people that are quite savvy, you've got that founder mentality, you've got people like Stephen Bartlett who are inspiring those people. Yeah, me too.
It's so wonderful.
Yeah, how do you help that generation really create a compelling vision? Because also they're younger and they have that drive, right? And they want to do that. But how are you going about kind of helping those sorts of people, the younger generation, structure their vision?
I love that you asked that question. When I leave here, I'm actually going to meet, I'm looking around for my agent. The show hasn't come out yet, but the people I invested in last time, spoiler alert, I'm actually going to meet them. And they're two of the most amazing boys from Birmingham that you could ever imagine. And for me, it's always about putting your money where your mouth is. I think that as a young girl from East London, I have a bee in my bonnet about what allows people to take part in business, what allows you to participate in entrepreneurialism. I didn't know anyone who owned a business when I was a kid. It just wasn't even a factor. Where I come from, you took a job, you probably hated it, you waited for the clock to turn 5, and you got out of there. And the idea of doing something that you love, that you would like do even if you weren't paid, just was so far from my idea of a reality. And so for me, the reason I love doing Dragons, or the reason I love doing Shark Tank, is because it's just so hopeful, right? It's these people that thought something was so important that they should get up and do it, that they should take the reins. And then if you get an opportunity as someone like me to invest in that, to give people access and opportunity, and I talk constantly about this idea of a network, right? It's like, I think I'm successful because I have this incredible network, a group of people that allow me to get stuff done. Bank managers, lawyers, people that have invested in me, private equity, like all, the full gambit. And so I think if you're two lads from Birmingham and I can help you and give you access and give you a little bit of a blueprint for how to potentially take your business from 100 grand in a bunch of farm shops to actually getting a big deal with a supermarket and thinking about, perhaps building that business internationally, like, why would I not?
Yeah.
Right? It's the very essence of what I'm about. And I think that when you have a bit of success, it's your duty to leave the door open, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, very important to do that in England, very important to do that with young people, even more important to do that with women. And so I really think about this as being like, this is just part of why I'm successful. It's not for me to kind of like, sit here and chat to you lot. It's actually about being able to say there's a crop of people, because talent is fairly evenly distributed. Opportunity isn't. And if you can be somebody's opportunity, and that for me is these two boys from Birmingham, then absolutely that's something I'm going to do.
Yeah. To finish off my questions from me, I think what's really interesting about the answers that you've given, it seems that you've outlined new rules of engagement, new styles, new leadership qualities that I think are coming through. What do you think from 2014 to 2024? What do you think are the big differences that a leader should possess?
I'm laughing because I thought you were going to ask me, what's the differences in the workforce? I was like, what?
Oh, yeah.
How long do you get? Well,
We've
listen,
got-
so that actually, so I go back, right, because everything I do goes back to people. The differences in being a leader 10 years ago is the workforce, because people have a very, very different idea of what work is and means to them right now. And as a leader, you have to adapt. You might not like it. I don't like all of it, I'll be completely honest, but that doesn't matter because the people have spoken. And so my leadership style has no choice but to adapt to the new rules of engagement. And the new rules of engagement are like, people don't want to work every hour. They want a better sense of balance. They want flexibility. And my point of view is, I just want to win. So if I can give you the environment and the optionality around how you come to work, and you can give me the results, then we can work together. It's just that simple. So I think that my leadership style has completely adapted because the workforce needs something different. I think as society, we need something different, and I'm all for it. We just have to do it in a way that allows us all to win and be paid and do great stuff. And so again, it comes back down to this social contract, right? It's like you can come to work 4 days a week, you can be at every single parent's evening, you can go to the dentist at 11 o'clock if you like. I don't really care. What I care about is winning. And as long as we can align on those two things, I'm good, let's go.
Is that, actually, just before we came out, our CEO spoke about the kind of social deal. And so it's kind of come full circle from that. So I love that. So I'm going to pivot to audience Q&A, but just going to finish us off with a quick game of Would You Rather.
Oh, Lord.
Oh, every time I say that, people think I'm going to... No, nothing naughty, don't worry. So, power nap or power through?
Oh, power through. I can't nap.
Well, me too. Customer first or employee first?
Oh, they're the same for me, so both.
Perfect answer. You gut instinct or data-driven? Congrats.
Oh, come on.
Got that one. And last but not least, London or LA?
Oh, stop it. It's London. Of
Yeah. Hey. Thank you. Sorry for anyone LA watching from LA. So we love you. So moving on to our audience Q&A. You can actually vote on them, by the way. So if you see a question that someone's asked, you want to come first, then let me know. But I'm going to start with a question from Chris Ho. Emma, how do you communicate a tough decision and steer level 1 employees to see the big picture?
I love that question.
Great start.
So, you know, one of the things that I do every year, and I come back to it every month during these all stuff, so we have what we would call, like, you know, the broad priorities of the business, and they really are presented in a one-pager. And my team, like the team members that I love the most, are the ones that print that out and they have it there, because every day I think people have too much to do and they're overwhelmed with, you know, different tasks. And I always say to everyone, guys, do what works towards the priorities. If you understand the bigger vision of the company, and that's not something that's only shared with senior management, your staff will make better decisions that ladder up towards those goals. So to me, it's really, really simple. It's like you share those broad priorities at the beginning of the year, and they are flashed to the entire organisation every single month. Whenever there's a leadership meeting, it starts with that. And when I'm talking about operational excellence, I'm like, remember that one, guys? That's why we're talking about this subject. So it's like constantly making those connections, but you have to ingratiate the entire organisation with what that means.
Yeah, you're definitely all that. You've hit the right audience here. You're saying all the right words. Killer interview question to find the right employee.
Oh, what is my killer
tough.
interview question? Do you know what? I always ask people, I don't know if it's the most killer, but I always ask people about when in their career they felt like they were doing their best job. It's a very, very telling question. You know, people will go, oh, you know, well, when I was like in this company and I did this and da-da-da-da-da-da, and it gives you, like, I'm always looking, you know, at a certain point you look at a resume and it's like, they can all do the job. I'm always looking for the thing that's underneath and what actually gets that person excited and out of bed. And as soon as you ask a question like that, it's very telling for, like, what actually makes somebody tick.
Love it.
You know, because I also don't really believe, I'm like attitude over experience. Do you know what I mean? I'll take someone with a killer attitude over all the experience in the world. And that's just because I think that that's kind of who I am.
And that question actually gives an opportunity to talk about experience, but actually does it in a way that actually is testing for the attitude and the passion. Yeah. So this is a question from Monica. How do you explain to your employees when you can't make changes they're requesting due to information you are privy to, but they aren't? Does that make sense?
How do I say the question one
So
more time?
how do you explain to employees that you can't necessarily do what they're saying or make the changes that they want because, of course, you have some information, but it might not be public yet or they might not know it yet?
I don't know
Maybe
that
restructures
I have
or
that much.
changes,
I
yeah.
mean, listen, I probably get asked a million questions a day because I have a bunch of people that are sitting on a bunch of LTIs that are like, when are we going public? I'm like, I'm going to tell you that. You know, I don't know. I just think I'm too straightforward. I'd probably be like, I can't tell you that because I'm sitting on a piece of privileged information that you can't know me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I
that
just
was
think,
the answer, right?
I'm that straightforward. Like, I'm not a smoke and mirrors person. I don't have time for it. I have 4 kids and 3 companies. It's like, I don't have time to lie to you. I'm just going to tell you that you can't know that yet.
Yeah,
and as
yeah.
soon as you can know, I'll let you know.
Yeah.
I think people appreciate it. I don't think we're all grown-ups, right? And people enjoy just like straight down the line. I'll tell you when I can tell you.
Okay, so, actually, this is a great question about technology. We spoke about innovation, but you can't talk about innovation without talking about technology. Actually, last year, I asked Steve the same question, and he said he uses technology, specifically AI. He creates 100 different thumbnails of a Diary CEO, and he kind of tests that. And that's a very him use of AI. It's like that assessed with that 1%. What's the you use of technology?
You know, it's really interesting because, you know, I'm one of those people that's immediately like threatened by AI, right? I'm like, oh my God, it's going to take everybody's jobs. How are we going to do this? Because the way I see AI being used in my business is in the way of creating so many efficiencies that I don't even need an accounts department at this time. I'm keeping accounts there because I like them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, it's way easier to do, like, you know, to look at thousands of chargebacks across hundreds of wholesale accounts using AI technology. I think the way that I'm thinking about it is through a people-led point of view. How is it going to make my people better and more efficient? And how can they be empowered to use AI? So we created an incentive structure and said, anyone in any department that uses AI to make themselves or the division more efficient will get a bonus. A, it makes it happen. B, it's more about, you know, it's people-led. So I'm like, how do you make yourself and your division more efficient? But we're not trying to take the people out of it. So I'm here and I'm embracing, I'm all about next level, but I'm not thinking about it as a way to create financial efficiencies in my business, i.e. reduce the workforce. I don't want to work with a bunch of computers. I'm not interested. I want to work with people.
How do you, but the kind of like modern world of work is very techie. How do you use tech to kind of like work with your employees and hear what they're saying? Of course, I know you don't.
Oh, you know, in every way. I think that our companies are so many surveys. There's like, you know, you can write something down, you can post it into this group, you can ask the CEO anything. There's like so many different ways. Nice. But I think that when we think about technology, it's actually about creating, you know, again, because I run businesses that are very digitally native, and so the business is on this premise of constantly testing. So if we can make efficiencies through testing, instead of sending, you know, 4 different versions of an email to, you know, 4 different states in America, I'm sending 400, getting the results in 30 seconds, reiterating those, going again, seeing the results, looking at conversion, looking at where the highest CTR, AOV, UPT is, and then we're rolling again. And so we're using it in that very kind of like granular, by-the-minute way to create.
You're almost like using it to mirror the velocity culture that you've kind of like created to live.
Yeah, but it, you know, it's one of those things that I think that we try to do with an enormous amount of responsibility, because you're really treading a very, very curious line when it comes to what you're saying, like how you're communicating with customers, right? And how much you need people. Yeah. Because at this point, it's extremely automated.
Yes, yeah, cool. Well, thank you. Please, everyone give a round of applause for Emma.
Thank you.
So, we are getting ready for, you've got 10, 15 minutes for your next session, and here is what we have up next. You can actually stick with me in this room. I'm doing our Ask an Internal Comms expert panel. You can go to our spotlight room, so you've got those customer case studies, which is taking the first steps with employee journeys. That's held by National Grid. I know Chris spoke about them in the keynote before, and that's also about automation, so that's a great one as well. And if you want to cater for that next generation of the workforce, hear how Optimum, Altice USA are meeting the needs of that workforce and how they're designing an EX strategy, that's in our deep dive room. I think of that like a little TEDx room. So that's what's coming up next. Don't forget the social competition. If Emma had a great quote, and she had many, feel free to share that on LinkedIn. The most engaging one will win a Remarkable. And yes, thank you so much for listening, and feel free to grab a coffee. Thanks.